Welcome and hello, everyone, to our newest episode of Preserving History and Democracy podcast. I'm Caroline Zamora. I'm the Chief Deputy County Clerk. Behind camera today, we have Cynthia Mendoza, our communications coordinator and one of our producers. We also have with us today Bernardine Caporale, one of our producers and researcher extraordinaire. And joining us today from the city of Las Cruces is Troy Ainsworth. But before we start talking to Troy, Bern, why don't you give us some information about what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, today we're going to be talking about roads, specifically the roads to and from Las Cruces heading north and also heading south, and how it transformed the city. Roads are a lot like railroads. They bring ideas, economics, they bring social change. So cultural diffusion spreads across the miles and brings people and ideas closer together. Las Cruces sits between El Paso, Texas, and Santa Fe, the state capital. And to connect each area required planning and budgeting.
And so here to talk about the importance of roads and the connections made is our guest speaker, Troy Ainsworth. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us, Troy.
Well, thank you both. Thank you all for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so before we jump into the conversation, you want to go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm one of those rare birds that was attracted to historic preservation as a graduate student at Texas Tech University, and that has been some years ago. I am now personally eligible for listing in the National Register myself, so I'm there. I'm at least 50.
That's what do you mean?
My age.
Okay.
Not for any other reason.
I thought you had like a special.
Yes, a special gift.
Very special.
Agedness. And so it's been a long career up to this point. I'm about to continue it at the Fort Bliss military installation.
Congratulations
on
that big step.
Begin on Monday, the third day of June, whatever that's going to be, coming right up. Yes, I am one of those types who is really interested in the built environment and the stories that are embedded in buildings, and so when we decided we were going to discuss about roadways, I thought, well, that's a logical connection, where the road is built and then buildings are built near them. And so while I'm primarily focused on buildings, it'll be interesting, to share a little bit of what we think with regard to the importance of the road, because I liked your phrase a moment ago that roads help convey ideas, very similar to railroads. And of course, you import and export food, culture, thought,
Right.
We can add disease, unfortunately, because that's one of the things where, people moving about place to place, whether in whatever manner, that's also an aspect, the transmission of disease.
Right.
So, we're human beings, and we're in contact with each other. We speak, and all that, and so everything kind of connects together in that regard.
Right. Well put.
Yeah.
Didn't think of diseases there.
Yeah, and you know what? Last night I had book club last night, and we were talking. One of the books we just read is like a tech book, and one of the quotes was, "You build a plane, you also build a plane crash. You build a car, you also build a car crash. You build a road, eventually something.
Yeah.
There's always good and bad with something.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So earlier we were talking about the old highway. What can you tell us about the old highway? And the old highway that we're talking about is Highway 28 between Las Cruces and El Paso.
Oh, okay. A lot to unpack there, which is good. The image that comes to mind when I think about roadway is a soil profile. So if you take a shovel blade and you cut into the ground and you remove some earth, you can see different layers of soil type, sand and loam and humus. Okay. And so it gives you an idea of when layers of deposit were made. And I kind of equate that image to the layers of roads in New Mexico. So before recorded history, the river is a main arterial, if you will, because it is there. And the people who inhabit what we call New Mexico, tended to congregate and build along the river. The pathways across the greater southwest and northern portion of Mexico, what the architect Henry Trost called arid America. The evidence of human activity at far-flung places indicates that people who lived, say, in the upper Rio Grande region are trading with people in the Casas Grandes region in Estado de Chihuahua. There should not be macaw feathers in places such as the Gallisto Basin. Those birds are not native to that region. How do those feathers arrive there? Where do saltwater pearls, soft shells pearls come from? Because we know that they cannot they don't appear spontaneously. They are discovered in when you open up the shell, and there's something of value, and something of value that can be traded to people elsewhere who make good pottery, for example. So we have a whole network out to the Pacific, to the Gulf of California, to the Gulf of Mexico, into Texas, this whole trade network. And so we can begin with our roadway in this part of North America right there, with the indigenous peoples who are walking great distances. And that's really where it all begins. All right, so now we fast forward in time, a long time.
No, but that's just so interesting, even just thinking about how the Rio Grande was used as, it was the roadways of that time before roads and before railways. And I just think of I think of like all these beautiful places just going up north, whether it's like Chaco Canyon or it's like the Taos Pueblo, of course, Santa Fe, things like that have always been along the Rio Grande.
That's right, and the river system, the Gila River and the Conchos River, the Pecos River, the important thing is that rivers provide access to, of course, to transportation to at least some extent, even though the Rio was never used in the sense of canoes or boats or anything that we're familiar with that occurred elsewhere. But there's fish, and there are birds, and there are mammals that are always present along the river.
Right.
And so the river is the life giver in many ways.
You've got food and water.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so aside from the floods, the rivers are pretty consistent. They don't disappear. They don't go away. And so it made sense, to really build near the river. It's a reliable source of water and food. Okay, so it's, of course, no accident that the earliest entrances into New Mexico are along the Rio Conchos to La Junta de los Rios, which is at Presidio Ojinaga, and then upstream to El Paso del Norte into New Mexico. All right, so the river becomes a road in some ways for the early Spanish entradas. So there's another layer of roadway. And, of course, we all know El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro is built upon those early Spanish routes that are, in many portions, are just retracing of existing pathways. This whole notion that Oñate blazed a brand new trail is not entirely true.
Okay.
There are segments that he did, granted, but segments and wholesale are two very different things.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's I always try to keep that in mind, that he was building upon the knowledge of the land by native guides, not exclusively members of his own entrada. Because
And what a harsh, environment to break through.
Well, that's right, because the not only is the landscape open and expansive, there is evidence that the climate was moister and that there was more rainfall. it begs the question: how tall were the prairie grasses? That is really interesting, because what we see now with the expansion of the Chihuahuan Desert into a very arid topography, and the species that thrive, creosote in particular, creosote being an indicator plant. Creosote may not have existed in numbers during the 16th century.
Wow. Right.
So there's an instructor, a faculty member at New Mexico Tech, Dr. David Love, and Dr. Love is a geologist by trade. And so he and I were talking one time, and we were out at San Lorenzo Canyon. This is probably 8 years ago or so, and we're out at the canyon, and he was talking about how he equated the scene from the Disney film Fantasia in the 1940s, where Mickey has opened up the sorcerer's spell book, and he's read an incantation, and the mops begin marching, and the water is all cascading, and he's unleashed something he can't control. Okay. You didn't know we were going to talk about Mickey Mouse.
I didn't know we were going into
Did not know that
Fantasia.
this would
is
go
good.
to Mickey Mouse. And so Dr. Love was talking about, he said, I kind of see that, these creosote plants almost creeping in on little feet, because it was a gradual arrival for them. The plants have to be, the seeds have to be carried either by the wind or through animals. And so, their progression is dependent upon other factors. Part of that is they have to have a climate where they can thrive. And their climate is dry and arid. And so as you're near Los Lunas and Albuquerque, you see that's where creosote begins to kind of end. You're now at the northern end of the desert.
Right.
And so the southern end is in Estado de Durango, in that area. Okay, so it's an expansive, but during to the point, it would be very difficult to cross this segment of the continent in the 16th century, 17th century, because there are no one on the Entrada has any experience crossing this land. That occurs over time, and being in such a wide open space can be daunting, and that you have to know every mountain does not look the same.
Right.
Okay, so pay attention to the landscape. Time necessitated marking out places, parajes, camping spots on the south road of Camino Real. Okay, so that's real important. Now you can begin to identify place names and their appearance. Okay, so it provides a little bit of psychological comfort that you're reducing uncertainty. You know that if we make this point, I have a better sense in my mind how closer we are to our destination.
Right.
And so the wonderful name, the Royal Road to the interior. In New Mexico's case, there's never a road in the sense that we think of a road, not even a Roman road, but the purpose was the very same. If Rome is the hub of the empire, the city of Mexico is for Spain, for its New World Empire. And so from Mexico City, that's where like spokes on a hub emanate to the corners of the empire in North America. Mm-hmm. California, down to Guatemala, out to the Yucatan, and back across the ocean to the motherland, right, into Texas, and into New Mexico. And so what Spain did was reenact Rome's model for roads.
So can I ask you, the roads into like what are those roads called? Like
in California.
How come we got the royal name?
Okay.
And why were we special?
Okay, we were special. Yes. By decree the crown would authorize a Camino Real. And so there are multiple Camino Reales in the New World. In Spain itself, there is the Camino Real that goes to Salamanca, and that is a holy pilgrimage site there along the northern edge of Spain. So Camino Reales exist in Spain and in the New World. The Royal Road System, basically, this is where record keeping could have been a little more imaginative and creative because the same name was applied every time, Camino Real.
Okay.
Well, which one? So the people would speak, well, it's the road to the north, to the interior. Okay, so that is indicative of New Mexico. It is the Camino Real to California, the Camino Real de los Tejas, okay, over into the missions in East Texas and Louisiana. So although they are all called Camino Real, it's not even number 1, number 2, number 3. It was the same thing. Camino Real, Camino Real, Camino Real.
That reminds me of New York, an area I lived in.
Yeah.
Everything was W. We had 9W, 14W.
And it didn't stand for West? It was just a W?
It was just a W.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very strange.
Did you attend a school by the name of PS with a number?
Of course.
Okay, which one did you go to?
PS 199.
PS 199. And did y'all have a mascot? Do you remember?
You know, I'm a little older than you, so
Okay, don't recall.
don't recall.
Okay, yeah, I always wondered what it would be like to go to school in New York and go to a school that was PS with a number.
PS and JHS.
JHS.
JHS 125.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very creative names.
You know.
Well, this will be a tie. Actually, this will be a tie-in. In a moment, we'll get there.
Okay.
I'll bring it back full
Okay,
circle.
there we go.
I'll bring it back full circle, even all the way from Nuevo Yorko
Yes.
to New Mexico. We'll get there. But go ahead. You have a question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, why, so our Camino Real is Camino Real Entrada de
Tierra Adentro.
Tierra Adentro.
Yep.
So
the
that means,
interior
Tierra Adentro means interior
land.
land.
Yeah.
For our listeners, just FYI.
Yep.
And of course, Camino Real means the royal road. Camino, road, Real,
That's
royal.
it.
And so, so it was just people kind of picking what these names were. It really wasn't the Spaniards doing it.
Okay. See, there is a debate, and the German anthropologist, geologist, in the early part of the 19th century. I'm drawing a blank on his name. It'll come to me in a little bit. In 1803 to 1805, von Humboldt, Alexander von Humboldt.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, there you go. It's von Humboldt. He is in the New World, and he has done at the time he is doing groundbreaking recording work, and it's on geology. It is on botany, it is on culture and history, and he is working between Yucatan, Mexico City, and down to the Pacific coast, down towards the southwest portion of Mexico, and so he is a very much a Renaissance man. He is exploring many portions of North America, so in Northern California, we have the Humboldt River named for him. There's
Humboldt County.
Humboldt County. There is
Where my daughter lives.
There you
Really?
go. Okay. So he is the namesake.
Wow.
Okay, he's the guy.
Look at that.
And so Humboldt State University is a campus up there in the northern part of California. He's a very important geographer and a cultural geographer. So
Of course, at the early 1800s, New Mexico
Yeah.
doesn't become a state till 1912.
Right. And
so this is the California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado.
all of that does not become
Yeah,
part
all
of
of
the
that is
U.S.
still Mexico.
It is still Mexico for a little less than a half century. But in his writing, even though Humboldt did not come to New Mexico proper, he has a whole section. This was a multi-volume work that he wrote on Mexico. And part of it is about the road system that emanates out of Mexico City. So at his time, these were still Camino Reales, because the revolution for independence does not occur until a decade after he's in Mexico, or about a decade. But he does not travel into Texas or to California or New Mexico, but he makes reference to it because he's looking at, from the Zocalo in Mexico City, he is looking at records of the dollar figure, peso figure of trade goods, items that are imported from Spain or elsewhere, come to Mexico City, and then are dispersed and sent along the Caminos Reales to the far-flung corners of the North American Empire, including Santa Fe. And so vicariously, he is referring to the route that we're familiar with, that when we drive from here to Santa Fe, he's writing about in the opening years of the 19th century without having seen it, because what he's doing is this amount of weight or value of pick your commodity, pick whatever item it is, nails and hardware, candelabra, candlesticks, hides, foodstuffs, whatever, are being carried, conveyed to the north. In exchange, we're bringing back all these products that we can't produce here. And so there's your economic, your economic outline is laid out. So what you acquire out here on the coast of the Pacific, down towards the Pacific coast in the southwest part of Mexico, out in Texas, it's all, he's accounting for all of these trade goods. And so you see the difference of what of the raw materials, that
What's available in
what's
each area.
available and what is needed from the different corners of the empire. And so the roads are very, very important because they become the commercial artery. All right. So it's not just conveying people, but it's goods and services as well.
Very interesting.
And it's real interesting connection that he was looking at these things and considering the economics. A class title that I took at Texas Tech was called Man's Economic Environment, and it was a geography class, and it talked about this very concept of centers of manufacturing or agriculture, and then the concentric circles that come out from it, if you will, of where labor and goods and materials are available, and how those components are all interrelated. And so, looking at geography through an economic lens. And that's what von Humboldt was actually doing in 1803, 1804, 1805, before there was a name for that very activity.
So follow the money.
Follow the money.
Well, I mean, there's got to be a purpose, right?
Yeah.
All right. And so, and so, let's keep in mind, from Spain's point of view, it's the early 19th century. England has, assumed a greater amount of power and a role on the world stage. Spain is kind of eclipsing. So, anything that the Spaniards can do to stave off, the encroachment of Her Majesty's realm would be very helpful. And holding
so in
that
the
new
early
world
1800s,
empire.
I'm thinking like what was going on with England at the time. I mean, of course, India they had already.
India was in the
I don't
fold.
think they had given away India yet.
No, that's going to be basically they're going to hold on to India until right after the Second World War.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's still a ways to go.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you consider that 1803.
Because where would have England's empire been in relation to Mexico? All I could think is maybe some of those islands.
Islands in the Caribbean, Canada.
Canada.
Okay. Not in South America.
No.
So basically, after the American independent movement, England's frontier proximity to Spain really does increase because it basically withdraws all the way up to the U.S.-Canadian line, the present
Okay.
line, which gave Spain a little bit of breathing room for a little while. But Spain had internal problems, and it was only a matter of time before it lost its new world
Got it.
empire.
Mm-mm.
But that was part of an overall bigger nationalistic movement, I would say. Hey, if these pesky colonials over here on the Atlantic seaboard can fight off England, we ought to be able to fight off Spain.
Yeah.
Okay, so and it happened. So there you have it.
This is good fun. I love this conversation.
Good.
I love history. So.
It's tying a lot of different angles in
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
which bigger picture, I mean, it's what history is about. There's never just one linear.
Oh, quite right. I mean, it would be the rarest of rare stories that it has no antecedent or no precedent, and all of a sudden, it is something that it is the act of an individual at a time, and everything operated in an absolute vacuum, which we know just is not the case. I mean, it's causality, a decision that's made in Madrid has lasting impacts on the people who live in and around Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it takes a little time for that message to make its
Get there,
way,
yeah.
but these are the consequences of officialdom's decisions and actions. I would argue that providing for a Camino Realis network is one of the most consequential acts that Spain's government ever committed to in the New World,
Right.
because it really does ensure the maintenance of the empire for as long as it was able to hold on. So we're talking about, from the 15th century until the independence movements of the early part of the 19th century. So you're talking about 400 years,
Yeah.
más o menos.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's really incredible is that during that time, the indelible layering of Spain's culture in all of its forms and variations is now embedded in North America, in many parts of North and Central and South America. And I would argue one step further, it makes us all richer, especially for those of us who, are Anglo and grew up elsewhere,
Mm-hmm.
where it's a whole new world. It's very interesting in
It
my
really
mind.
is.
Yeah, I mean, it's where does it all come from?
Right.
And that's the part that interests me.
Right.
Because we look at, getting back to preservation for a second, when you look at buildings in arid America, especially what Henry Trost was designing, where the lessons that he learned from Spanish architecture and later Mexican architecture, and how the building must be emblematic not only of culture but environment. Now, the building has to be able to deflect light and heat.
Mm-hmm.
It must have the capability, like the creosote plant, to thrive in a warmer environment. So this is a very different approach to building than, say, New York City,
Right.
okay, where you have much more rainfall. You're at a more northerly latitude, so you have a difference in temperature. In the winter, you're actually going to receive much more snowfall,
Right.
the whole 9 yards. And so what's interesting is that for those who are kind of in tune, and I would say Henry Trost is, he recognized the value of building within the environment. But one of the things that's intriguing is the career of Henry Trost or a Mabel Welch, who I will argue is the greatest architect in the borderlands. She is my hero. Without a Spanish presence their architectural designs never happened the way that they did. And take it one step further, by Spanish presence, had there not been roadways, even if we consider them primitive trails, by our definition of a modern road, those roadways are crucial because they allow for the stretch and the extent of empire to occur. This is probably what George Lucas was talking about when writing Star Wars. It's all about the empire,
right.
and so I keep using that word, but it's very deliberate because the empire is the catalyst
Yep.
in which all of these other actions emanate from. I think is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just think of kind of getting back to thinking about you mentioned decisions get made in Madrid, Spain,
Right.
and it takes them a while to make their way from Mexico City up our Camino Real to Santa Fe.
Right.
And then if we look at our old highway, we look at all these small cities that were pueblos that were happening, San Miguel, Mesilla, all these that were stops along the way, and that had to be, like you said, the land was just land, and it was vast, and these were places that you had to stop so that it didn't feel overwhelming on your travels or just
Yeah. It's interesting, and the article that you and I both read earlier, Bern, the man who wrote it indicated he gave away a very crucial clue that he may not entirely know what he's talking about.
Okay.
And
I love that. We got a clue.
just a hint when he said in his opening paragraph with regard to New Mexico, that although New Mexico is a small state, it is rich in these little nooks and crannies of interesting places to visit. And right when I read that, I thought, if memory serves me, the land area, New Mexico is the ranks number 6 in total area.
I don't think he's ever been in New Mexico.
Okay, so that means 44 states are smaller.
Yep.
Okay. So
I often tell people when they ask me, oh, you're from Mexico? No, I said New Mexico. It's
Mexico.
that really big chunk of land between Arizona and Texas.
And even the New York
really
Times,
big.
within the last 10 years, the New York Times on a Sunday edition had a map of the United States published, and there was a void between Arizona and Texas.
Really?
And it was not color coded, and it was not labeled.
How
I mean, there's
strange.
Arizona, there's Colorado, there's that little bit of the Oklahoma panhandle, there's the Texas panhandle, and then there's Mexico. And the suggestion was that the international line west of El Paso actually goes north, continues west, and north as well. And that Colorado, therefore, would border Estado de Chihuahua, which we all know not to be true.
Right.
So it just reinforced the one of our 50 is missing
Right.
mentality.
So just to be clear, we don't need a passport.
No,
No.
you do not need a passport to go.
Just to be clear.
It's not international travel to go from here to El Paso, Texas. You don't.
Yeah.
And so I think what's interesting is the fact that distance to travel is already compounded just by the sheer factor of topography and linear distance between point A and point B. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, where you're linking settlements and that exist between larger places such as El Paso and Las Cruces, and then further north. One of the things that I find kind of interesting about the early roads is that after Camino Real here in southern New Mexico, after independence, its name is changed to Camino Nacional. Of course, it's now the national road. How else can it be? We're no longer colonials. We are independent.
National.
the next major layer, I suppose, of transportation, what happens next during that period from Mexican independence all the way up to the war between the two countries. And then you have this long period of time that New Mexico and Arizona, of course, remain stepchildren and are not admitted until 1912 into the Union. But during that long territorial era, it is the railroad system that we're all familiar with. That but for the railroad, Las Cruces would be a village of 4,000 or 5,000 people, maybe a little more, but it would not be a modern mid-sized American city. There's just no way. All you have to do is look at the difference between Mesilla and Las Cruces.
Yeah. We did a podcast.
We did a
railroad.
podcast
Yeah.
on the railroad.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that we spoke about when the railroad was coming in. There was about 2,000 people in Mesilla and about 2,000 people in Las Cruces. And then just look at the difference now.
That's right.
And we
Of course,
talked
there's
about
other factors, but
we talked about some of the influencers, like maybe the Armijo family, I think we talked about, who had decided, well, the railroad's going to run through Las Cruces, not Mesilla. Or there was going to be a stop in Las Cruces, not in Mesilla, and how those couple of people basically changed history. Changed Las Cruces.
And then before a decade goes by, the decision is made to put the Agricultural and Mechanical Arts College, not in Mesilla, in Las Cruces, or south of Las Cruces, Mesilla Park, but still, El Paso has a very similar history, because of the railroad. It begins to grow, and Fort Bliss doesn't hurt either. But there are plenty of places in the nation that during that era of massive railroad building, so that dream began in the 1840s. This idea of a transcontinental railroad, and like the interstate highway system, it's going to be interrupted by, in the case of the railroad, it's going to be interrupted by a uncivil war, and it's going to resume in the decade after. The railroad system was able to link all the corners of the country, but when you look at it, it's really kind of a limited way. The railroad tracks can crisscross in all manners of landscape, but the towns that exist or develop away from the railroads require, new roadways in order to access them. And so there's a value and a limit to it at the same time. So after this 20, 25, 30-year time frame where the railroad is the primary mode of transportation, overland transportation, an interesting movement began, and I think it was in Nebraska, and it was a movement among rural residents, primarily farmers and ranchers, who wished to have their products taken to market. Again, the economic environment, and it was given the name the Good Roads Association, or the Good Roads Movement initially. And so the whole idea here was that there needs to be a way where, we can't just build railroads everywhere. So there have to be, to use a railroad analogy, there has to be a spur line that connects from this portion of the state or territory to the railroad. And so we need a good road to convey across.
I bet the railroads were in support of that.
Very much, because now what you can do is, if you're the railroad, you may be able to reduce the number of stations. You can have farmers, bring product to a station, kind of centralize a station. The train stops, loads everything, and they can convey it to a Chicago, a St. Louis, ultimately to New York, Boston. All right, so these are the factors that are going into it. Well, along comes Mr. Ford, and now that we have, now that we can rethink the purpose of a road from horse or mule drawn wagons and conveyances, now we have an internal combustion engine. Aha. Okay. Now we love the old timey footage, the film footage, in the cars, and how they were both very sturdy and very rickety at the same time. And when you look at some of that early footage in filmmaking, what's really remarkable is that these roads are often unpaved. They're pretty narrow, and many times you'll see it. They just look perilous, and woe be the traveler if the rains are falling and they're muddy.
Yeah.
All right. So these you are stuck,
Yep.
and so you have all these environmental factors that have to be overcome. Road building, and I'll bring it into New Mexico for a second. So during the territorial era, about 1903, chapters, I guess, of the Good Roads movement begin to organize in New Mexico. All right, now we have decision makers in Santa Fe and elsewhere saying it is imperative for the growth and prosperity of New Mexico to exist in concordance with what is going on elsewhere in the country. The prioritization of a roadway system was one of the underpinning factors that led to statehood, which I thought was fascinating. You're not a backward territory. You're actually thinking, in line with other places in the nation. And so that was real important for statehood.
Yeah, how important that decision was that in order for us to become a state, they had to see that we were advancing and that we were, forward thinking. That's so interesting.
We're thinking about, New Mexico was thinking of itself as American. And so that approach apparently carried a great deal of influence in Washington, D.C. to ultimately lead to statehood. So the impetus being put on roadways 4 years after statehood in 1912. So in that 9 years, 1903 to 1912, efforts are being made, and even here in the county commission in 1907 in Doña Ana County, in 1907 and 1908, as we were looking at a little bit ago, the county commissioners, from the minutes of some of their meetings, are speaking about marking out the route of El Camino Real, which is fascinating because, mentioning places such as San Miguel and the New Mexico College of Agricultural and Mechanical Arts. So
which is now New Mexico State University.
Exactly, and tying it in to the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad tracks. And so here we are in 1907, 1908, and the county is looking at the very real matter of mapping out a route to connect settlement A to settlement B to settlement C, and that ultimately you're going to link Las Cruces down to El Paso. So while the county commissioners are working on this idea, at the same time, in a larger perspective, you have the National Highway Association, which is established in 1911. A man by the name of Charles Davis was his name, and he was back east. He was in New York and in Virginia. He had offices in, I think, in Richmond and in New York City. And so in 1911, he organizes this entity, the National Highway System. And so he envisioned that there should be a network nationwide. In the following year, that organization came up with the slogan, "Good Roads for Everyone." Okay, so there's that Good Roads movement again. The fruit of that effort is, in 1906, the Federal Aid Road Act, Federal Aid Road Act, 1916. And so that was really the beginning of federal involvement.
So this association was basically the precursor to our, what is it, the Department of Transportation?
That's
Okay.
right. And so that's exactly correct. And so in 1916, during President Wilson's administration, this act is passed by Congress in order to map out and plan a automobile trail, which I find that to be a very fascinating phrase. That although they use highway, and that's an old word, highway. The point being, the routes were thought of by the name trail to build upon the existing routes that have been used for time immemorial, but now they're specific for the automobile. Yeah. And so one of the earliest outcomes of that automobile trail system is the Bankhead Highway. All right, so the Bankhead Highway, named for John Hollis Bankhead. He was born in 1842, and he passed in 1920. Bankhead was very interesting because the climate has changed a great deal from his day to ours. When he was 19, so right there in 1861, he was very much in support of the Southern cause. And so he was a Confederate, and I think unabashed even after the war, that he supported the South. Served in the House of Representatives for something like 10 terms.
Oh, wow.
Was a United States senator, and he was very supportive of the highway idea. 4 years before he died, he was able to see the Federal Aid Road Act enacted. All right, so 3 years later, 1919, is when a young officer recently graduated from West Point, Dwight David Eisenhower, is involved with the very first United States Army motor convoy, Atlantic to Pacific. And this was basically a trial run to see how difficult it would be to motor across the country. And it was a enlightening but terrible experience, apparently. And so young Lieutenant Eisenhower, in the next war, when the Allies are advancing into Germany, General Eisenhower was very impressed with what the German government under that Austrian corporal had done to build a modern autobahn, a highway system. Okay, because the German army was able to move troops and munitions
Quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so, but that road can go both directions.
Yeah.
And so it behooved and benefited the Allies in the advance into Germany as well. And this made a really important impact on Eisenhower. So as president, he, of course, is now speaking, I think in his 1954 State of the Union address, he spoke at length about the need to fulfill
For a highway system.
That's right. We have to fulfill this dream. And so it was interesting because officially, in kind of a nod to the 1916 Act, in 1956, so here 40 years later, the Federal Aid Highway Act was passed. So just changed it one word. But its actual name is very telling. It was the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So we all are very familiar with what Hollywood did.
So they were thinking, so he was thinking, if we're ever invaded, we need...
If our troublesome neighbors across the Bering Strait
somehow came over and invaded us.
we need to have troops over in Washington, Oregon, and California as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hollywood made much of Route 66. There was, of course,
right.
a television show. There were multiple movies that pertain to the Mother Road. Of course, it's the subject of Grapes of Wrath, and Dorothea Lange's wonderful photographs. Some of them right here in New Mexico, which is wonderful. That's a whole wonderful topic to discuss at another time. But you have the highway becoming part of American culture. There in the post-war era, we're all familiar with the family station wagon and loading up everybody, and that quintessential summer event that we've lionized and made into a Norman Rockwell moment.
The nuclear family.
The
really,
nuclear
yeah.
family,
Mm-hmm.
and so while Hollywood is talking and showing that side, the president is thinking, well, if you can put station wagons on a paved highway, you can put tanks and troop trucks on a paved highway. All right, so the word defense is not just a throwaway word in the title, and so this is informing Eisenhower's thinking. All right, so all of that is the reason why we have Interstate 25, Interstate 10, and all that. And like public school 199.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. Okay, time was that you had a automobile trail from Washington, D.C. that made its way across the Virginia, Carolina, Alabama, or Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, into Arkansas, and west of Little Rock. The road divides, like the poem by Robert Frost. And so you have a southerly branch that goes to Hot Springs and down to Texarkana, my hometown. Texarkana, salute. And makes its way to Dallas, Fort Worth, Abilene, and then it makes its way over to Midland and down to Van Horn, El Paso, Las Cruces.
There we are.
Takes a Bugs Bunny turn at Crucesville and heads out to Tucson and makes its way to San Diego. All right. A northern route west of Little Rock goes down into western Arkansas, into Oklahoma, then at Childress, Texas, Clovis, New Mexico, down here to Roswell, where a spur line came off of that southern route that went from west of Abilene up to Snyder and then over to Plains and to Roswell. And so those two meet at Roswell and then come over the mountain to Alamogordo and Las Cruces. So today, when a person drives here in town on North Main Street and they make the big curve and they cross the interstate and they go across San Augustine Pass, they're driving on a section of the Bankhead Highway. So the Bankhead was the first coast-to-coast, or one of the first coast-to-coast highways. Washington, D.C. to San Diego.
Yep.
All right. So where do you see Interstate 10, Interstate 20, Interstate 30, and a portion of Interstate 40? It's all Bankhead Highway.
Yeah.
All right. So to reiterate, you have indigenous people who walk the land and they map out routes along rivers, across open country. The Spaniards come along and they retrace much of those. The unspoken up to this point, we haven't touched on it, but military roads, reconnaissance roads in the age of the exploration of the 19th century repeat much of the Spaniards' roads. Then you have the railroad. Then you have the concrete and cement automobile trail. And then you have the interstate system. So Bankhead Highway, the Abraham Lincoln Highway, the George Washington Highway, the old Spanish trail that links San Diego to San Augustine, the Ozark Trail. These automobile trails were given colorful names. And they're wonderful because they were marked, colored bands on telephone poles. And so you don't have a sign that's a metal sign that's manufactured that's in a shape.
They used colors.
They used color and names, specific names. Only later, with the Interstate Act, do we start to see
10,
that
20, 30.
now we give it a numerical number, and it becomes bland.
Yeah.
At least in my mind.
Yeah.
I mean,
It is.
you're going to call that the Old Spanish Trail, and it's going to go from San Diego to San Augustine. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So in 1906, what they're doing in California is they mark out an automobile trail, the California Mission Road, or El Camino Real. So those who have gone to California and have driven part of Highway
PCH 1,
yeah,
Highway 1.
Yeah, that's right. Is on it aligns with that early route. So yes, the little roadside bells that are so cool.
Yes.
Okay, that's all.
What roadside bells?
There was what they would do. Basically, this is the Good Roads Association. So to mark the route, instead of having, say, a pole that may have letters etched in it, OST, Old Spanish Trail, they had a metal crook that a small little green colored bell hung from. And so the bells marked the trail, the automobile trail.
That's so interesting. I've never seen. Are there still some around?
There
like
are.
You can
Okay,
see
there
some?
was something. The estimate is that approximately 4,000
Are still
these
out there?
Were about 4,000 were installed.
Okay.
Between I want to say San Diego, the area of San Diego, up to San Francisco. I think today there's about half that are still there.
That's amazing.
So they have not been ripped off. They've not been stolen or anything like that, and they're absolutely wonderful because they mark that era. They literally mark the route. All right.
I've driven the PCH on a vacation,
Okay.
and I had no idea, but now I want to do it again and look for these bells.
It's this idea began in 1906, so it's literally just right before the county commission in Doña Ana County
Describing the road.
is using the very same name, El Camino Real. Okay, again, that gets back to the problem. You gave it a generic name. It's a royal road. It's by decree. So in California, what they're trying to do at this very time is promote the Golden State, of course. And so come to California.
All the gold rush and everything.
Yeah. Look at what we have. This is at a time where Pasadena is beginning to take off. It's not L.A. It's Pasadena, and there's still a bit of the old West, but it's modern California, and so it's no surprise that that's where in Pasadena you design perhaps the one of the most recognizable football stadia anywhere, the Rose Bowl, and that's where the Parade of Roses is held because, yes, it's a football game. That's right. But what you're doing now is you're promoting tourism, and so California had that. It has certain advantages. Its landscape.
And of course, in order to have all those things, they had to have their good roads.
They had to have good roads because people need to be able to travel. And so the very ideas that are informing decisions in California are being acted upon in Doña Ana County and in El Paso County. So I would say in a rare moment of genial cooperation, Texans and New Mexicans were working together because this Bankhead Highway route benefits us all.
Yes.
All right. And so, it's that sort of collaborative approach that has been that at least drives a lot of the decisions. Yes, this stretch of road is going to be in our county. That's true, and in this case, in our state and county. But you're our neighbor, and you neighbor on another county that gets us closer to a premier destination.
Yep.
So we need each other.
Yep.
We're going to have to work together here. And so for me, I find, again, the road's able to convey the idea. And there it is. Right. It is the part of, or I find the roadway story to be kind of a fascinating aspect of American history, because it does not. It's just something we don't readily think of.
No.
It's not the big person of history, whoever that person may be. These roads are constructed sometimes with convict labor. That was very. The Santa Fe New Mexican always wrote about how the governor provided for X number of convicts at the state penitentiary to help build roadway. Okay.
In some states, they still are.
In some states, they still do. That's right. And so, what's really interesting is that there's a whole story to unpack of the extent to which, from 1903 up until statehood, that the emphasis on good roads in the territory of New Mexico had an impact on some of the voting members of the House and the Senate to approve the instrument for statehood, which President Taft signed into law. And so to me, that's I've not looked into that to any extent, but I just find that it's really
Right.
It's like, oh, there's the cause, there's the causality. I get it. All right, that's
And
the
also
important
thinking,
part.
like going back to the part around defense and kind of like post World War II.
Yeah.
I think of like where the armories are.
Mm-hmm.
And I only have thought about this in the last couple of days because over the weekend my mom and I went to El Paso and we came back and we're driving down Main Street and she took she turns right and I'm like, Mom, this is not the way to my house. Where are we going? And she's like, oh, I want to show you the cemetery. I want you to put my ashes in. I was like, okay, sure. All right, let's go see it. And we're driving down this little street and I'm like, why is this so heavily secured? Like, what is this place right here? She's like, oh, it's the armory. And I was like, oh, I had no idea where the armory was. Like, I knew we had an armory. I never knew where it was.
Right.
And so now I think, like, where all these armories are, and they're probably on, of course, they're in defensive areas.
And that's, pardon me, that's a real interesting observation, because the location of an armory in this example does not happen by happenstance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So why do you choose Las Cruces and Deming, for example?
To have the armories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do they have in common? Well, they both happen to be on Interstate 10.
On interstates, yep.
So there's that factor. Does that suggest anything specific? It just might, because now if their presence there is confirmed by the road, well, do we have other examples? And then if you find them, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's your pattern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's very
Now
thought out and very
very
well
methodical.
planned.
Yeah, there's. I mean, we often joke about Washington D.C. and some of their inability, to pass legislation and all that, and it's a long-standing criticism of Congress and whatever presidential administration, but more often than not, there's good thought that goes into decision making. Things may not happen, at a fast pace, but they happen, and that may be an example of a thought out, but just really obscure action or set of conversations that lead ultimately to a precise decision making. And to build on your comment from a little bit ago, in Doña Ana County, if you're gonna link these settlements with roadway, the purpose is you're trying to ensure that people and goods can move from one point to another. And so there's a method about where the road is laid out. And the very same thinking may go into what we're talking about with armories as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's I would not be surprised. I'll put it that way.
I'm sure someone in the defense industry had put a lot of thought into it,
Without a doubt, because it is a planning activity.
Yeah.
And so before it became the Department of Defense and it was the War Department, they employed a lot of people to do a lot of thinking and planning for military preparedness, and it is no small thing to know where troops can be housed and where they can train before deployment. So
Yep.
yeah, I think there's we may have discovered something new right here.
This has been such a fun conversation.
This
We
has
started with indigenous peoples. We went to the
PS
Empire.
199.
Yeah, all the
Got
way
all
to
the way to
PS
New York City.
199. Yeah. And all these little just so interesting roads and the
Well, I have
impact
a
of them.
question, a final question.
Okay, sure.
If I could do that. Teaser, we're going to do a podcast on Albert Fountain, Sr.
Oh, the
there you
Fountain
go.
Theater.
Yeah.
And while I was looking for him, I found his name on a warrant
Of road
to
viewers.
road viewers. I'm going to put this on the website after so you all can see it. But what is a road viewer?
Wow. This
Road
is
viewer.
okay. First of all, the date is April 5, 1917. Okay. A road viewer. Wow. This is talking about right of way and a legal description of the right of way.
Oh, is this like an easement?
It's that's what it appears. Let's see. Road viewers. That's a phrase I'm not familiar with,
Okay.
but it's between. It is to O.C. Snow, A.J. Fountain Sr., Manuel Alday, April 5, 1917, from the Board of County Commissioners, asking for the change thereof as follows. And so it's legally described here. The following persons are appointed viewers to view the proposed change and assess damages. So I wonder if road viewer is an actual title of an individual, sort of like a commissioner, and that Snow, Fountain, and Alday are going to become road viewers, maybe inspectors for the roadway.
Okay.
Could be it.
Interesting.
I was thinking like surveyors of sorts
Okay.
or the people who look at the road after a survey is done. I didn't know what that was.
Well, it's talking about a plat that is filed for Mesilla Park tract of the Rio Grande Land Company that was filed here in the probate clerk of Doña Ana County in September of 1887. Oh, wow. Okay. And so it mentions the Bowman Lester corner. So this is all Mesilla Park, of course. This is going to be west of campus. I'm assuming that a road viewer is literally someone who inspects roadway construction. That is a wow.
That's
is
a
a
cool
cool
one, yeah.
That's a title I don't.
I've never heard of her.
And
Never
I
heard
just grabbed it this morning in
But
prep for my
sure.
my fountain episode.
Okay, because what's interesting here is the Federal Aid Road Act of 1916. So 1 year before this document, project number 66, authorized by that act, called for the construction of a concrete and cement roadway between Las Cruces and El Paso. So
Project number 66 on this federal
yeah,
act was
right.
a roadway
and
between.
It's such a tantalizing number because you think of Route 66, but it just happened to be the project number. All right. So interestingly, by the winter of 1916, construction was already begun.
Which is pretty fast. It's only a few years.
Which is very fast. By the spring of 1920, the section between the two locations is now completed. So, based on what I've been reading, those 4 years there was a lot of rainfall and snowfall, and so it interrupted the construction schedule. But when you think about it, okay, that document, what it suggests to me is during the construction, these are the fellows who are going to go out, inspect to make sure it's being built correctly. It's like a building inspector
Right.
now.
Right.
You call for
Right.
the electrical inspection, the plumbing inspection, the framing, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
I bet that's what that is.
Okay.
Okay, and the date lines up perfectly because they would have been, it's 40x miles between Cruces and El Paso. But in 1916, 1920, El Paso, of course, does not extend as far west as it does now, west and north, and neither does Las Cruces come as far south. So you need to add probably 10 more miles.
Okay.
So it's probably 50 miles, más o menos. But still, you're building, you're doing something revolutionary. You're using concrete and cement, and you're providing a hard surface, and it was covered in a tar substance, I guess to weatherize it, and unsurprisingly, the first coat that was applied in 1916 had to be redone in 1917. It began to bubble up and warp, and so I'd scrape it and do it again. But they were learning new road
And El
construction.
Paso's still working on those highways.
Yes, and will continue for
Continues to bubble.
Yeah, you wait 50 years, you defer all maintenance for 5 decades, and you just do it all at one time. Yeah. What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go
Right
wrong?
there downtown, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Also, we found some really cool documents,
Yes,
like the
we
ones
did.
that Angelica brought you this morning, the one you found, Bern. So we'll be sure to post those on our social media so you can see the documents.
We'll do that.
And then, man, this was just a really fun conversation. We talked about Fantasia. We talked about Star Wars.
Yeah.
What else did we talk about?
PS 199.
PS 199,
Yep, lovely PS 199.
Highway 66.
A little bit of Hollywood.
Yeah.
We covered a lot in a
This
short
was
amount of time.
Yeah, this was a fun one.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for.
I'm sure we'll have
inviting
you
me.
on again.
I'd be happy
yeah.
to. Yeah, of course.
That'd be great.
I'd be happy to.
Contact made. Thank you, Dennis.
Yes.
Yeah, Dennis is a good man. Thank you, Dr. Daly. I've just promoted you academically, sir.
Well, I think that does it for this episode of Preserving History and Democracy podcast. Be sure to follow us online wherever you can find a podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, all the places. Also, be sure to follow us on social media. I'd like to thank our guest, Troy Ainsworth, for joining us today. Also, Bernardine Caporale, who is one of our producers and researcher extraordinaire. Behind camera today, we have Cynthia Mendoza, our communication coordinator. And Jacob will be editing all of this. He's not here with us today, but he will be doing all the magic. Jacob Slaughter is one of our producers. Again, my name is Caroline Zamora. I'm the Chief Deputy County Clerk, and thank you for joining us. If you want to send us any feedback, you can email us at daclerk@donianacounty.org, and we'll see you next time.